So how China's labor force structure changed. So China's labor force is huge because we have a lot of people in China. China, based on 2017's data, China has 1.386 billion people. And in 2000, and so we have 740 million labor force. So we have a lot of work in China. And so the question here is, and so for this huge amount of labor force, so how many of them are working in the agriculture sector, and how many of them work in the industrial sector, and how many of them working in the servicing sector, and during the passing decades, how this structure changed. So first of all, we have to connect everything with a couple of threshold we learned in the first part of this lecture. That is a couple key benchmark, 1978 and 2003. So before 1978, so which is between 1949 to 1978, so majority of labor force working in agriculture. So we have 71% people actually work in the agricultural sector. It was not surprising because at that time we don't have advanced technology. So agriculture is a very important sector because people need to survive, need to eat. So people are less productive because the lack of the support from technology. So that's why most of people actually work in the agriculture sector. However, after 1978, and China experienced the three rapid bursts. So the first rapid burst is between 1983 to 1987. So that is called rural reform. So how the rural reform looks like. So the rural reform is the rural reform. So China has actually have a very strict, you had a very strict regulation between city people and villagers. And so, however, in between 1983 to 1987, as the collectives were disbanded and the farm output surged in the early 1980s, millions of farmers left to take up new non-agriculture jobs, and which means they actually leave the village and move on to the city to help to build the city. And so that's very helped the mobilization of the labor force, and the farmers actually moved to the city to work in the industrial sectors. And the second rapid burst is between 1991 to 1996. And so the second burst is because the economic growth surged and the restriction on rural to urban migration were significantly reduced. So which means it's even much more easier for a farmer to move to the city to find a job and to stay and find industrial jobs. So that's the second rapid burst. And the third rapid burst corresponding with the 2003 called investment-driven acceleration of the economy. So the periods of the more rapid economic growth are also a period of the expanding opportunities for rural workers and of accelerating structural transformations. So the absolute number of the agricultural workers reached a peak of the 391 million in 1991, and it has since started its long, steady decline. By the end of 2004, we have the reform of the economic reform. So the number of the agricultural worker reached 353 million for a cumulative decline of about 10%. So China no longer has a clear majority of its worker in agriculture. China is thus no longer a predominantly agriculture economy since 2004. But the half of the workers still in agriculture, China remains on the doorstep of the modern economy with much transformation still ahead. So that's why nowadays China doesn't consider it as underdeveloped country. Actually, it's a middle developed country. It doesn't consider it a well-developed country. So still developing country. And so, as I said, 2004 is very important. And since 2004, it is China's first time to have less than 50% of the labor force in agriculture. And nowadays, even less people working in agriculture. If we connect this structure change with the common pattern we just learned in the previous video, and we realize that China literally start to move on to the next stage of economy since starting from 2004, when the labor force has significantly decreased in agriculture sector. So China is literally start to move on to the industrialization.